I still remember the day I met my son's future wife. It was a warm Sunday afternoon in early spring. The sun was shining softly through my kitchen window, and I was standing there, holding my phone, staring at the message my son had just sent me. "Mom, I want you to meet someone important. Her family invited us to dinner next Saturday." I smiled when I read those words. My son, Daniel, had always been careful about relationships. He never rushed into things. So if he wanted me to meet someone, I knew this woman meant something to him. I typed back quickly. "Of course, sweetheart. I'd love to meet her." But just as I hit send, something inside me felt uneasy. Maybe it was just a mother's instinct. Or maybe it was the memory of my past experiences. You see, I wasn't always treated kindly by people when they first met me. And there was a reason for that. I lived simply. I dressed simply. And I never talked about my money. Not because I didn't have any, but because I learned long ago that money changes the way people look at you. After my husband passed away 10 years ago, I made a quiet decision. I would never let people know what I truly had. I wanted to see people for who they really were, not for how they treated my bank account. So I kept my life modest. I drove my old silver sedan. I lived in my comfortable but simple home. And I wore clothes that made me feel relaxed, not impressive. It was peaceful. It was honest. And most importantly, it protected my heart. A few days later, Daniel called me. "Mom, they're really excited to meet you," he said warmly. "That's wonderful," I replied. They're a bit formal," he added carefully. I noticed the hesitation in his voice. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" I asked gently. "Well, her parents are very successful. Her father owns several restaurants, and her mother used to be a lawyer." I smiled softly. "I see. And they're hosting dinner at one of their restaurants," he continued. "That sounds lovely," I said calmly. But deep down, I knew exactly what this meant. This wasn't just dinner. This was an evaluation. They wanted to see who I was. And honestly, I wanted to see who they were too. So I made a quiet decision that evening. I would go, just as I always was. Simple. Quiet. Unassuming. And I wouldn't mention anything about my finances. Not unless they asked. Saturday arrived faster than I expected. I stood in front of my closet, looking at my clothes. I picked a soft beige sweater and a simple dark skirt. Nothing fancy. Nothing expensive. Just comfortable. I brushed my hair gently and put on a small pair of pearl earrings, the same ones my husband gave me years ago. I looked at myself in the mirror. I looked ordinary. And that was exactly how I wanted it. When I arrived at the restaurant, I paused for a moment outside. It was beautiful. Elegant lights glowed through the windows. Inside, I could see white tablecloths and sparkling glasses. It was clear this place was expensive. I took a quiet breath and stepped inside. A hostess greeted me with a polite smile. "Good evening. Do you have a reservation?" "Yes," I replied softly. "I'm here to meet Daniel Carter's party." Her expression changed slightly. "Oh, of course. Right this way." She led me through the restaurant, and I noticed a few people glancing at me. I was used to that. Simple clothes often stood out in elegant places. Then I saw Daniel standing near a table. His face lit up when he saw me. "Mom." He walked over quickly and hugged me warmly. "I'm so glad you came. I wouldn't miss this," I smiled. Then he turned and gestured toward the table. "Mom, this is Emily." A young woman stood up and smiled politely. She was beautiful, well-dressed, and confident. "Nice to meet you," she said. "Nice to meet you too, dear," I replied gently. Then Daniel introduced the rest of her family. Her father gave me a firm handshake. Her mother smiled, but her eyes scanned me quickly from head to toe. And in that moment, I felt it. That quiet judgment. The kind I had felt before. The kind that always told me. They thought I wasn't good enough. And that was when I realized. This dinner was going to be more interesting than I expected. To be continued. Then her mother spoke first. "So, Margaret, what do you do?" she asked, folding her hands neatly on the table. Her voice was polite, but there was something behind it. Something measured. I smiled gently. "Oh, I'm retired now," I said calmly. "Oh," she replied, raising her eyebrows slightly. "What did you do before retirement?" "I worked in administration for many years," I answered. That wasn't exactly a lie, but it wasn't the full story either. You see, after my husband passed away, I inherited his business. A successful logistics company he had built from the ground up. But I never talked about that. I preferred to keep things simple. Emily's father leaned back slightly in his chair. "And now? How do you spend your time?" he asked. I read. "I garden, sometimes I travel," I replied softly. Emily's mother nodded slowly, but I could tell she wasn't impressed. The waiter arrived just then, placing menus in front of us. Everyone began looking through them, except me. I already knew I would choose something simple. Emily spoke excitedly about different dishes. Her father ordered the most expensive steak. Her mother chose seafood. Daniel looked at me gently. "Mom, what would you like?" I smiled and pointed to a simple pasta dish. "This is perfect for me." Emily's mother glanced at my menu. "Oh, that's the simplest item," she said casually. I smiled politely. "I don't eat much these days." She nodded, but again, that look. That quiet judgment. The conversation continued, but I noticed something. They talked mostly about business. Investments. Luxury vacations. New properties. Emily mentioned their summer home near the coast. Her father talked about expanding his restaurant chain. Her mother spoke about charity galas and social events. They all sounded very accomplished. And I genuinely respected that. But I also noticed. No one asked me anything else. No one seemed interested in knowing me. Except Daniel. He kept including me in the conversation. He asked about my garden. My books. My recent trip to visit an old friend. And each time he did, I saw a small smile on Emily's face. She seemed kind. But her parents, they were still watching me. The food arrived. Everyone complimented the dishes. I quietly ate my pasta. It was delicious. Halfway through dinner, Emily's father cleared his throat. "So, Daniel tells us you live alone," he said. "Yes," I replied. "In the same house?" he asked. "Yes, I've lived there for many years." He nodded slowly. "And Daniel visits often?" "Whenever he can." Emily's mother leaned forward slightly. "That must be difficult," she said. "What do you mean?" I asked gently. "Well, living alone. Managing everything by yourself." "Oh, I manage just fine," I smiled. She exchanged a quick glance with her husband. Then she smiled politely. "I'm sure you do." But I could feel it. They were forming opinions. Quiet ones. The kind people don't say out loud. After dinner, Emily excused herself to take a phone call. Daniel went with her. That left me alone with her parents. For a brief moment, silence filled the table. Then her father leaned slightly closer. "Margaret, may I ask something?" he said. "Of course," I replied. "What are your plans for the future?" he asked. I tilted my head slightly. "I'm sorry?" "Well, Daniel and Emily are planning their life together, he continued. Marriage, family, you understand. Of course, I nodded. And we want to make sure everything is stable, he added carefully. I understood exactly what he meant. He wasn't asking about my plans. He was asking whether I would become a burden. I felt a quiet calm settle inside me. I have everything I need, I answered gently. Emily's mother smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. That's good to hear, she said. Just then, Daniel and Emily returned. The conversation shifted again. Dessert was ordered. Coffee was served. And finally, the evening came to an end. Outside, Daniel hugged me warmly. How did you like them, Mom? He asked softly. I smiled. They seem like nice people. He looked relieved. I'm glad. Emily walked over and hugged me gently. It was really nice meeting you, she said. You too, dear, I replied. Her parents shook my hand politely. Take care, Margaret, her father said. Good night, her mother added. I watched them leave, and I felt something inside me. Not sadness. Not anger. Just curiosity. Because I had a feeling. This was only the beginning. And I had no idea just how much things were about to change. Not anger. Just curiosity. Because I had a feeling. This was only the beginning. And I had no idea just how much things were about to change. The following week passed quietly. I returned to my usual routine, morning tea, tending to my garden, and reading by the window in the afternoons. But Daniel called more often than usual. I could hear the excitement in his voice every time. Emily and I are getting serious, Mom, he told me one evening. I smiled warmly, even though he couldn't see me. I'm happy for you, sweetheart. And I truly was. Daniel had always been a good son, kind, thoughtful, and hardworking. If Emily made him happy, that was all that mattered to me. A few weeks later, Daniel invited me to lunch. We met at a small cafe near my house. He looked nervous as he sat down. That was when I knew something important was coming. Mom, he began, Emily and I are thinking about getting engaged. My heart warmed instantly. That's wonderful news, I said gently. But he hesitated. There's something else. I leaned forward slightly. What is it? He looked down at his hands. Her parents, they're concerned. I felt that quiet calm again. Concerned about what? About our future, he said carefully. I nodded slowly. I see. They think we should make sure everything is financially stable before we move forward. I smiled softly. That sounds reasonable. But Daniel shook his head slightly. They also asked about you. I looked at him gently. What about me? He looked uncomfortable. They're worried that I might have to support you one day. The words hung quietly between us. I wasn't hurt. I had expected this. Instead, I reached across the table and touched his hand. Daniel, listen to me, I said gently. You never have to worry about me. He looked up, surprised. I mean that, I continued. I've planned my life carefully. I won't be a burden to you. He nodded slowly, relief washing over his face. I knew you'd say that. We finished lunch and parted ways. But later that evening, I sat quietly in my living room, thinking. I wasn't upset. But I understood something clearly now. Emily's parents didn't just judge appearances. They also judged security. And I couldn't entirely blame them. Parents always want the best for their children. Still, I decided to keep things as they were. I wouldn't reveal anything yet. A month later, Daniel called again. His voice sounded excited. Mom. I proposed. My heart lifted. And? She said yes. I smiled warmly. I'm so happy for you. We're planning a small engagement dinner next week, he continued. Her parents insisted. That sounds lovely. And they really want you there. I nodded to myself. Of course. I wouldn't miss it. The evening of the engagement dinner arrived. This time, it was held at their home. When I pulled into their driveway, I noticed the large house immediately. It was beautiful. Elegant. The kind of home that spoke quietly of wealth. I stepped out of my old sedan and walked toward the front door. Emily opened it before I could knock. Margaret. I'm so glad you're here, she said warmly. She seemed genuinely happy to see me. Inside, the house was even more impressive. Soft lighting. Elegant furniture. Fresh flowers on the table. Her parents greeted me politely again. But I noticed something. They were still watching me carefully. Dinner was pleasant. Everyone talked about wedding ideas. Venues. Guest lists. Flowers. Emily looked radiant. Daniel looked proud. I quietly listened, smiling whenever they included me. Then, halfway through dinner, Emily's mother spoke again. Margaret, we were thinking. She began. I looked at her gently. Yes? We want to help Daniel and Emily buy their first home. That's very generous, I said sincerely. Her father nodded. We believe young couples should start with stability. I agree, I replied softly. Then her mother continued. And we wondered if you might be able to contribute as well. The table grew quiet. Daniel looked uncomfortable. Emily looked surprised. I remained calm. I appreciate the thought, I said gently. But Daniel and Emily should make their own decisions. Her mother nodded slowly. Of course. We just thought it would show unity. I smiled politely. I understand. The conversation moved on, but I noticed the atmosphere had changed slightly. After dessert, Daniel walked me to my car. I'm sorry about that, Mom, he said quietly. There's nothing to be sorry for, I reassured him. They mean well. He nodded. But as I drove home that night, I felt certain of one thing. They were testing me. And I was still pretending to be exactly what they thought I was. Someone simple. Someone modest. Someone with very little. But soon, they were going to discover just how wrong they were. But as I drove home that night, I felt certain of one thing. They were testing me. And I was still pretending to be exactly what they thought I was. Someone simple. Someone modest. Someone with very little. But soon, they were going to discover just how wrong they were. A few days after the engagement dinner, I received a call from Emily. Her voice sounded warm and cheerful. Margaret, I was wondering, would you like to go dress shopping with me this weekend? I was surprised. I'd love to, dear, I replied. We're going to a bridal boutique downtown, she added. That sounds lovely. Saturday morning arrived, and I drove to the boutique in my usual old sedan. When I arrived, I noticed Emily already standing outside with her mother. They were dressed elegantly, as always. Emily waved at me with a smile. Hi, Margaret. I stepped out of my car and greeted them both warmly. Emily's mother smiled politely, though I noticed her eyes briefly glance at my car. We walked inside together. The boutique was beautiful, soft lighting, elegant mirrors, and rows of stunning dresses. Emily tried on several gowns. Each one looked beautiful on her. I offered gentle compliments, and she seemed genuinely happy with my opinions. Then, while Emily was in the fitting room, her mother leaned slightly toward me. These dresses are quite expensive, she said casually. I smiled. Yes, they are beautiful. She nodded slowly. We want the wedding to be elegant. I'm sure it will be, I replied. Emily returned wearing a stunning ivory gown. Her eyes sparkled. What do you think? She asked. You look radiant, I said softly. She smiled, clearly pleased. This one might be the one, she said. Her mother looked at the price tag and nodded. We'll take it. Everything seemed to go smoothly. Afterward, we decided to have lunch together. We sat at a quiet cafe nearby. Emily chatted happily about wedding details. But her mother remained quieter than usual. Then, just before we left, she spoke. Margaret, have you thought about what you'd like to contribute to the wedding? Her tone was calm, but direct. I paused gently. I think Daniel and Emily should decide what they need first, I replied. She nodded slowly. Of course. We just want everything to be fair. I smiled politely. I understand. We parted ways soon after. As I drove home, I thought about everything. They weren't rude. They weren't cruel. But they were measuring everything. Every detail. Every decision. Every sign of financial ability. And still, I said nothing. A week later, Daniel visited me at home. He walked into my living room and sat down quietly. You've been quiet lately, Mom, he said gently. I smiled. I've just been thinking. About the wedding? He asked. Yes, and about you. He smiled softly. I'm excited, but also nervous. That's normal, I reassured him. He looked around my living room. You've always kept things so simple here. I like simple, I replied. He nodded. Then he hesitated. Mom. I want to ask you something. Go ahead. If things ever got difficult, would you tell me? I reached over and gently touched his hand. Daniel, I promise you. I'm more than fine. He smiled, reassured again. We spent the afternoon talking quietly, like we always did. But after he left, I made a decision. I would continue pretending. Not to test them. Not to trick them. But simply to see what mattered most to them. And deep down, I had a feeling something unexpected was coming. 2 weeks later, Daniel called again. Mom, we're finalizing the guest list. Emily's parents want to host a formal dinner to introduce everyone. That sounds nice, I replied. It'll be at their main restaurant, he added. I smiled softly. I'll be there. The evening of the formal dinner arrived. This time, the restaurant was even more elegant than the first. Large chandeliers. Soft piano music. Perfectly arranged tables. I walked in quietly. And once again, I could feel the glances. I spotted Daniel and Emily across the room. They greeted me warmly. But as the evening continued, I began to notice something. Emily's parents were introducing guests. Business partners. Friends. Family members. But when it came to me, their introductions were brief. This is Daniel's mother. Margaret. Nothing more. No warmth. No interest. Just politeness. And that was when I realized. They had already formed their opinion about me. But I remained calm. Because I knew something they didn't. And soon, everything was about to change. As the evening continued, guests moved around the room, laughing softly and sipping their drinks. I stayed near the corner of the hall, quietly observing everything. Daniel and Emily looked happy. That was all that truly mattered to me. But I couldn't ignore what I was noticing. Emily's parents were warmly introducing everyone else. This is our friend Robert, he owns 3 hotels downtown. This is Susan, she runs a successful law firm. This is Michael, he's one of our business partners. Each introduction was filled with pride and enthusiasm. But when they introduced me, "This is Daniel's mother, Margaret." That was all. No warmth. No interest. No effort to know me. I simply smiled politely each time. After a while, I stepped outside onto the restaurant patio for some fresh air. The night was calm, and the city lights glowed softly in the distance. I took a quiet breath. Then I heard footsteps behind me. It was Emily. "Margaret, are you all right?" she asked gently. I smiled. "I'm just enjoying the fresh air." She stood beside me, folding her arms lightly. "I hope my parents aren't making you uncomfortable," she said softly. I looked at her, surprised by her honesty. "They're just being protective," I replied kindly. She sighed quietly. "They care a lot about stability and appearances." I nodded. "I understand." She looked at me thoughtfully. "You know, Daniel talks about you all the time." "Does he?" I smiled. "He says you're the strongest person he knows." My heart warmed. He's always been kind. Emily hesitated for a moment. "Margaret, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Are you really comfortable living alone? I mean, do you have everything you need?" I understood the question immediately. "Yes, dear," I answered gently. "I have everything I need." She nodded slowly. "I'm glad." Just then, her father stepped outside. "There you are," he said, looking at Emily. "They're about to make a toast." We returned inside together. Everyone gathered around. Emily's father raised his glass. "To Daniel and Emily, may their future be bright, stable, and successful." Everyone applauded. I smiled quietly. But then something unexpected happened. A man approached me. He looked familiar. Tall, well-dressed, perhaps in his early 50s. He smiled warmly. "Margaret. I didn't expect to see you here." I looked at him, surprised. "David?" I said softly. He laughed gently. "It's been years." David had once worked with my husband, long ago. He had later become one of the senior partners in the logistics company I inherited. Emily's father turned slightly, noticing the interaction. "You two know each other?" he asked. David smiled. "Oh yes. Margaret and I go way back." I stayed calm. "It's been a long time," I said quietly. David nodded. "I've actually been meaning to call you. The board wanted to discuss the expansion plans with you." Emily's father looked confused. "Expansion plans?" he asked. David paused slightly, realizing he might be revealing something. But it was too late. "Yes," he said politely. "Margaret is still the majority owner, after all." The room seemed to quiet slightly. Emily's parents looked at me. Their expressions changed. I remained calm. David continued. "We're opening 2 new distribution centers next quarter. I thought you might want to review the proposals." I nodded gently. "Send them to me. I'll take a look." Emily's father blinked slowly. "I'm sorry, majority owner of what?" he asked carefully. David smiled politely. "The Carter Logistics Group." Emily's mother's eyes widened slightly. That's a large company," she said quietly. David nodded. "It's one of the most successful logistics firms in the region." Silence fell around us. I kept my expression calm. "I prefer to keep things simple," I said softly. Emily looked stunned. Daniel looked equally surprised. "Mom, you never told me," he said quietly. I smiled gently. I didn't think it mattered. Emily's parents exchanged a glance. For the first time, their expressions held something different. Not judgment. Not curiosity. But surprise. And perhaps a little embarrassment. Because in that moment, everything had just changed. Daniel was still looking at me, trying to process what he had just heard. "Mom, you own the company?" he asked quietly. I nodded gently. "Your father built it. After he passed away, I decided to keep things running quietly." He blinked slowly. "But, you never said anything." "I didn't think it was important," I replied calmly. Emily stood beside him, her expression soft but surprised. "I had no idea," she said gently. I smiled. "Most people don't." David excused himself politely, sensing the moment had become personal. "I'll send those documents tomorrow," he said before walking away. Emily's parents remained silent for a moment. Then her father cleared his throat. "Margaret, that's quite impressive," he said carefully. "Thank you," I replied softly. Her mother's tone softened as well. "You must be very proud of what you've maintained." "I'm proud of my husband," I answered gently. "He worked very hard." The atmosphere around us had changed. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. But it was noticeable. Suddenly, their posture toward me felt different. More respectful. More attentive. Daniel shook his head slightly, still smiling in disbelief. "Mom, you really surprised me tonight." I laughed softly. "I suppose I did." The rest of the evening continued, but everything felt different now. Emily's parents began including me more in conversations. They asked about travel. About my interests. About my experiences. The same people who had barely acknowledged me earlier were now eager to talk. I answered politely, but I remained the same. Calm. Simple. Quiet. Later that night, Daniel walked me to my car again. "Why didn't you tell me, Mom?" he asked gently. I looked at him warmly. "Because I wanted you to build your life without thinking about money." He nodded slowly. "I appreciate that." "And Daniel," I added softly. "Yes? Money should never be the reason someone values you." He smiled. "I know." He hugged me warmly. "I'm proud of you, Mom." I held him gently. "I'm proud of you too." When I got home that night, I sat quietly in my living room. Everything had changed, but also nothing had changed. I was still the same person. Still living in the same simple home. Still driving the same old car. But now, the truth was out. A few days later, Emily called me. Her voice sounded softer than before. "Margaret, would you like to have lunch together? Just the two of us?" I smiled. "I'd like that." We met at a small cafe, simple and quiet. Emily arrived early. She looked thoughtful. After we ordered, she spoke. "I hope you weren't uncomfortable the other night," she said gently. "Not at all," I replied. She hesitated. "My parents, they can be very focused on financial security." "I understand," I said kindly. She looked at me carefully. "But you never once made them feel embarrassed." I smiled. "That wouldn't help anyone." She nodded slowly. "You're very gracious." I shook my head gently. "I just believe people show who they are in time." She smiled softly. "I'm really glad you're going to be part of my family." My heart warmed. "I'm glad too, dear." That afternoon, we talked for a long time. About Daniel. About life. About the future. And for the first time, I felt like she truly saw me. Not for money. Not for status. But simply, as Daniel's mother. A week later, Daniel called again. "Mom, my future in-laws want to invite you to dinner." I smiled slightly. "Of course." But this time, I had a feeling the dinner would be very different. And I was right. A few evenings later, I arrived at their home again. But this time, something felt different the moment I stepped out of my car. Emily's father opened the door himself before I even reached it. "Margaret." "Welcome," he said warmly. I noticed the difference immediately. His voice was softer, more genuine. "Thank you," I replied gently. Inside, Emily's mother greeted me with a warm smile. "We're so glad you could come," she said. I smiled politely. "It's nice to see you again." Dinner was already set on the table. Everything looked elegant as before, but the atmosphere felt warmer. Daniel squeezed my shoulder gently as I sat down. "You okay?" he whispered. I nodded. "I'm fine, sweetheart." As dinner began, Emily's father spoke. "Margaret, I hope you don't mind me saying, but we were quite surprised the other evening." I smiled softly. "I understand." He cleared his throat. "You've managed things very quietly." "I prefer a simple life," I replied. Emily's mother nodded. "There's something admirable about that." I thanked her gently. The conversation continued smoothly. They asked about my travels, my garden, even my favorite books. The same topics that once seemed unimportant to them now felt meaningful. Halfway through dinner, Emily's father leaned forward. "We also wanted to talk about the wedding," he said. "Of course," I replied. "We'd like this to be something we all contribute to, as a family." I smiled. "I think that's a lovely idea." Emily reached for Daniel's hand, smiling softly. "We don't want anything too extravagant," she added. Daniel nodded. "We just want something meaningful." I watched them both, feeling proud. Emily's mother smiled warmly. "We were thinking about a small venue by the lake." "That sounds beautiful," I said. The rest of the evening passed comfortably. After dinner, Emily's mother invited me to sit in the living room. She poured tea for both of us. "Margaret, I hope you didn't feel judged when we first met," she said quietly. I looked at her kindly. "First impressions can be misleading," I replied gently. She nodded. "I suppose we focused too much on appearances." "It happens," I said softly. She looked at me thoughtfully. "You know, you remind me of someone." "Who?" I asked. "My own mother," she replied quietly. "She lived simply too, even though she had more than enough." I smiled. "Sometimes simplicity brings peace." She nodded. "I think you're right." Later that evening, Daniel walked me outside again. The night air felt calm. "They like you, Mom," he said with a smile. I laughed softly. "I hope so." "They really do," he assured me. I looked at him warmly. "I'm just glad you're happy." He hugged me gently. "I am." As I drove home that night, I thought about how much had changed. Not because of money, but because truth has a way of shifting perspectives. And yet, the biggest change was still ahead. Because the following week, I received a call that would surprise everyone, including me. The next morning, I was sitting in my garden, sipping my tea, when my phone rang. It was David. "Good morning, Margaret," he said warmly. "Good morning, David," I replied. "I hope I'm not calling too early." "Not at all." He paused for a moment. "I wanted to discuss something important with you." I set my cup down slowly. "Go ahead." "We've been reviewing the expansion plans," he continued. "And the board agreed, it might be time for you to step in more actively." I smiled softly. "I've always preferred staying in the background." "I know," he said gently. "But this opportunity is different. We're opening a new headquarters downtown." "That sounds ambitious." "It is," he replied. "And we'd like you to attend the opening ceremony." I thought for a moment. "When is it?" "Next Saturday evening." I nodded. All right. I'll be there. After we ended the call, I sat quietly, thinking. I rarely attended corporate events. But something told me this one might be important. Later that day, Daniel called. Mom, what are you doing this weekend? He asked. I actually have an event to attend, I replied. Oh. What kind of event? A company opening. He sounded curious. Your company? I smiled slightly. Yes. That sounds exciting, he said. It should be interesting. Saturday evening arrived. I stood in front of my closet, looking at my clothes. This time, I chose something different. A simple but elegant navy dress. Nothing flashy. Just graceful. I styled my hair carefully and wore the pearl earrings again. But this time, I also took out something I hadn't worn in years. A delicate gold bracelet my husband had given me. When I arrived at the new headquarters building, it was already filled with guests. Elegant lights. Soft music. Business leaders and partners. David greeted me at the entrance. Margaret, you look wonderful, he said warmly. Thank you, David. As we walked inside, I noticed something unexpected. Daniel, Emily, and her parents. They were standing near the center of the hall. I paused. David, did you invite them? I asked quietly. He smiled. I thought it would be nice. I nodded gently. Daniel noticed me first. Mom? His eyes widened slightly. Emily smiled warmly. You look beautiful, she said. Thank you, dear. Emily's parents also seemed surprised. This is quite an event, her father remarked. Yes, it is, I replied softly. Soon, everyone gathered for the opening speech. David stepped onto the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight. He spoke about the company's growth. Its future. Its vision. Then he paused. And now, I'd like to invite someone very special. My heart skipped slightly. The person who quietly supported this company for years. Margaret Carter. The room turned toward me. Daniel looked stunned. Emily's parents looked equally surprised. I walked slowly toward the stage. David handed me the microphone. I looked at the crowd. And then I spoke softly. My husband built this company with honesty and hard work. After he passed away, I simply tried to honor his legacy. The room filled with gentle applause. I smiled and stepped down quietly. But when I returned to Daniel and Emily, I saw something in their eyes. Not just surprise, but pride. And in that moment, I realized something important. It wasn't about money. It wasn't about status. It was about being seen for who you truly are. And from that night forward, everything felt different. Because now, they finally understood. And so did I. But the biggest surprise was still waiting. After the ceremony ended, many people approached me. Some were old colleagues I hadn't seen in years. Others were new partners, smiling warmly and introducing themselves. I greeted everyone politely, but I stayed calm, just as I always had. Daniel stood beside me, still processing everything. Mom. I had no idea it was this big, he whispered. I smiled gently. It grew over the years. Emily looked around the hall, clearly impressed. You've been keeping quite a secret, she said softly. I laughed quietly. I never meant for it to be a secret. Emily's parents stood nearby, watching respectfully. Her father finally spoke. Margaret. I must say, this is remarkable. Thank you, I replied kindly. Her mother nodded. You've handled everything with such humility. I smiled. I've always believed humility keeps life peaceful. We continued talking for a while. But then, David returned to us. "Margaret, may I speak with you for a moment?" he asked. "Of course." We stepped aside into a quieter corner. "There's something else," he said. I tilted my head slightly. "Yes?" "We're planning a new branch, in another state." "That sounds ambitious." "It is." And the board thought, perhaps Daniel might be interested in a leadership role. I blinked slightly. "Daniel?" David nodded. "He has a strong background, and we believe he'd do well." I looked toward Daniel, who was laughing softly with Emily. "I'll speak with him," I said gently. When I returned, Daniel noticed my expression. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Yes," I smiled. "David has an idea he'd like to discuss with you." Daniel looked surprised. "With me?" I nodded. "Why don't you talk to him?" Daniel agreed, and the two stepped aside. I watched them quietly. After a few minutes, Daniel returned, looking stunned. "Mom, he offered me a leadership position," he said softly. I smiled. "What do you think?" I don't know what to say," he admitted. "Say what you feel." He paused. "I'd like to earn it. Not just because I'm your son." My heart warmed. "That's exactly why you deserve it," I replied gently. Emily squeezed his hand proudly. "I'm so proud of you," she said. Later that evening, as the event ended, Daniel walked me outside. The night air felt calm again. "You've always done so much quietly, Mom," he said. "I just did what felt right." He hugged me gently. "I hope I can make you proud." "You already do," I whispered. As I drove home that night, I felt peaceful. Everything had unfolded naturally. No drama. No confrontation. Just understanding. A few weeks later, wedding preparations continued. But something had changed. Emily's parents now treated me like family. They asked my opinion. They included me in decisions. And most importantly, they spoke to me with genuine warmth. One afternoon, Emily's mother called me. "Margaret, would you like to help me choose the flowers for the wedding?" she asked. "I'd love to," I replied. As we walked through the flower shop together, she smiled softly. "You know, I'm really glad Daniel has you as a mother." I smiled. "I'm glad Emily has you as a mother too." She laughed gently. "I think we're going to be a good family." I nodded. "I think so too." And in that moment, I realized something beautiful. Sometimes, people judge too quickly. Sometimes, they misunderstand. But when hearts remain open, things have a way of changing. The wedding day approached quickly. And none of us knew that the most emotional moment of all was still waiting for us. The morning of the wedding arrived quietly. Sunlight streamed softly through my bedroom window, and for a moment, I just sat on the edge of my bed, taking it all in. My son was getting married. It felt like just yesterday he was a little boy running through the backyard, laughing and calling for me. And now, he was starting his own family. I took a slow breath and stood up. I had chosen a simple but elegant dress for the occasion, a soft silver color that felt calm and graceful. Nothing too flashy. Just like me. I carefully brushed my hair and placed my pearl earrings on again. The same ones I had worn the day I first met Emily. I looked at myself in the mirror. I felt proud. Not because of money. Not because of success. But because my son had grown into a kind, thoughtful man. And that meant more than anything. When I arrived at the venue, the lake shimmered under the gentle sunlight. White chairs were arranged neatly along the water. Soft flowers decorated the aisle. It was beautiful. Just like Emily had imagined. Guests began arriving, greeting one another with warm smiles. Daniel spotted me and walked over quickly. He looked nervous, but happy. "You look beautiful, Mom," he said softly. I smiled. "You look handsome, sweetheart." He laughed quietly. "I'm a little nervous." "That means it matters," I replied gently. He nodded. Emily's parents approached us. Her mother smiled warmly. "Margaret, we're so glad you're here." "I wouldn't miss this," I said. Her father shook my hand. "It's going to be a wonderful day." "I believe so too," I replied. Soon, the music began. Guests took their seats. Daniel stood at the front, waiting. Then Emily appeared. She walked slowly down the aisle, her dress flowing gently. She looked radiant. Daniel's eyes softened the moment he saw her. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt. They exchanged vows. Spoke softly. Promised to support each other through life. And when they said "I do," the applause filled the air. I felt tears in my eyes. Not sadness. Just pure happiness. After the ceremony, the reception began. Laughter. Music. Warm conversations. Everything felt peaceful and joyful. Then, unexpectedly, Daniel took the microphone. "I'd like to say a few words," he said. The room quieted. He looked at Emily, then at me. "Today is one of the happiest days of my life," he began. "But there's someone I need to thank." He turned toward me. "My mother." My heart skipped. Daniel continued. "She taught me kindness, patience, and humility." The room was silent. She never cared about status or money. She cared about people. My eyes filled with tears. "And everything I am today is because of her." He paused. "Mom, thank you for always believing in me." The room filled with gentle applause. I wiped my tears quietly. Emily then stepped beside him. "And I'd like to say something too," she added softly. She looked at me warmly. "I'm grateful not just for marrying Daniel, but for gaining you as family." My heart felt full. The applause grew louder. In that moment, I realized something deeply meaningful. This journey had never been about proving anything. It was about understanding. About patience. About letting people see you, in time. As the evening continued, I sat quietly, watching everyone laugh and celebrate. Daniel and Emily danced. Guests smiled. The lake reflected the soft lights. Everything felt peaceful. And as I looked around, I knew something for certain. Sometimes, the quietest people carry the strongest stories. And sometimes, the greatest wealth isn't money. It's love, respect, and family. And that was more than enough. The end.